They laughed at the homeless man sitting alone in the corner. But none of them knew that the man they were humiliating owned the very restaurant they were sitting in. And before the night was over, one of them would beg him for forgiveness. The rain had been falling for almost an hour when Daniel walked through the doors of the most expensive restaurant in the city. Nobody looked twice at him. His clothes were old and torn. His shoes were covered in mud. His hair was wet from the rain, and his beard had grown for several weeks. To everyone inside, he looked like a homeless man who had somehow wandered into the wrong place. Daniel slowly walked toward the back corner and sat down. A waiter immediately approached him. "Sir, I'm sorry, but..." Daniel looked up. "Yes." The waiter glanced at his clothes. "This restaurant has a dress code." Daniel smiled quietly. "I understand." He reached into his pocket and placed a few crumpled bills on the table. "Can I at least get a cup of coffee?" The waiter hesitated, then sighed. "Fine." He walked away. Daniel looked around the restaurant. Everything was exactly as he remembered. The golden lights, the expensive paintings, the polished marble floor, the large crystal chandelier hanging above the main dining area. Nobody knew it, but Daniel had personally designed half of it. Because this wasn't just any restaurant. It belonged to him. Daniel was a billionaire. But tonight, he wasn't there as the owner. He was there because he wanted to discover something money could never buy. The truth about people. For the past 6 months, Daniel had been watching people change around him. Employees treated him differently when they knew who he was. Business partners smiled when he entered a room. Women suddenly became interested in him after seeing his expensive car. But Daniel wanted to know. What would happen if nobody knew he was rich? He wanted to find someone who could look beyond his money. Someone who would treat a poor stranger with the same respect they would give a billionaire. He took a sip of coffee. Then he heard laughter. 3 women had just entered the restaurant. They were beautifully dressed. The first wore a red dress. The second wore black. The third wore yellow. They sat at a table near Daniel. One of them noticed him. She whispered something to the others. All 3 looked toward him. Then they laughed. Daniel lowered his eyes. A few moments later, the woman in the red dress walked past his table. She stopped. "Excuse me." Daniel looked up. "Yes." She smiled mockingly. "Are you lost?" The other 2 women laughed from their table. Daniel calmly replied, "No." She looked at his clothes. "Then why are you here?" Daniel looked around the luxurious restaurant. "I came for dinner." She laughed. "With what money?" Daniel didn't answer. She pointed toward the door. "You should probably leave before someone calls security." Daniel looked at her. And instead of getting angry, he smiled. Because at that exact moment, he realized something. His little experiment had just begun. But he had no idea that one of those 3 women would soon become the most important person in his life. And before the night ended, she would discover exactly who Daniel really was. The woman in the red dress stood beside Daniel's table, waiting for him to leave. Daniel simply looked at her. "I ordered coffee." She crossed her arms. "And I'll finish it." The woman laughed. "You actually think you belong here?" Daniel looked at her for a moment. Does someone need to be rich to deserve a cup of coffee? Her smile disappeared for a second. Then one of her friends called from the table. "Rachel, leave him. He's probably never been inside a restaurant like this before." The 3 women laughed again. Daniel didn't respond. He simply took another sip. The waiter returned with the bill for the coffee. $5. Daniel placed the money on the table. The waiter picked it up and walked away. Rachel returned to her friends. Daniel watched them quietly. He wasn't angry. He was disappointed. Not because they had mocked him, but because he had hoped people might be different. A few minutes later, an elderly man entered the restaurant. He was wearing an old coat and carrying a small paper bag. He looked tired. The hostess immediately stopped him. "Sir, I'm sorry. We're fully booked." The old man looked confused. "I only need somewhere to sit for a few minutes. It's raining outside." The hostess shook her head. "I'm sorry." Daniel watched everything. Then he stood up. "Excuse me." Everyone looked at him. Daniel walked toward the old man. "You can sit with me." The hostess looked uncomfortable. "Sir." Daniel ignored her. He pulled out the chair beside his table. The old man slowly sat down. "Thank you." Daniel smiled. "You're welcome." Then Daniel called the waiter. "Bring him a hot meal." The waiter looked surprised. "Sir, he hasn't ordered." "I know. Who's paying? Daniel pointed toward himself. I am. From the nearby table, Rachel watched. She whispered. Unbelievable. One of her friends laughed. He's probably spending his last money. Rachel looked at Daniel. For the first time, she didn't laugh. She watched him place the menu in front of the old man. Choose whatever you want. The old man looked at him. I can't afford this. You don't have to. Why? Daniel smiled. Because someone once helped me when I needed it. The old man lowered his eyes. You're a good man. Daniel didn't answer. But Rachel heard those words. Something changed in her expression. She looked at Daniel again. He was still dressed like a homeless man. His shoes were dirty. His jacket was torn. Yet he had just spent money on a complete stranger. Meanwhile, she and her friends had spent the last 10 minutes making fun of him. Then the restaurant manager suddenly walked into the dining room. He looked around. Then his eyes landed on Daniel. His entire expression changed. He immediately started walking toward him. Rachel noticed. Why is the manager going to that homeless man? Her friend shrugged. Maybe he's finally throwing him out. But the manager didn't throw Daniel out. Instead, he stopped beside his table, straightened his jacket, and quietly said, Mr. Anderson, we've been waiting for you. Rachel's smile disappeared. Daniel looked at the manager. Then slowly glanced toward the three women. He knew the moment had arrived. The truth was about to come out. And Rachel was about to discover that the man she had mocked wasn't a homeless stranger at all. The manager's words hung in the air. Mr. Anderson, we've been waiting for you. Rachel stared at him. Her two friends stopped laughing. Daniel slowly stood from his chair. The manager immediately lowered his head respectfully. Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't know you had arrived. Daniel looked at him. That's exactly why I came tonight. The manager looked confused. Sir. Daniel glanced toward Rachel and her friends. Don't worry about it. Rachel's face had gone pale. She looked at Daniel's torn jacket. Then at the manager. Then back at Daniel. Mr. Anderson. One of her friends whispered. Wait, isn't that the owner? Rachel's eyes widened. Daniel didn't answer. The manager finally said what nobody expected. Yes, this is Daniel Anderson. The room became strangely quiet. Daniel Anderson, the billionaire, the owner of the restaurant, the businessman whose company owned several luxury hotels across the country. Rachel slowly stood. You. She couldn't finish the sentence. Daniel looked at her. Yes, you own this place. Daniel nodded. Rachel's face turned red. I didn't know. I know. Her friends immediately stood. We're sorry. Daniel raised his hand. You don't need to apologize for not knowing who I am. He looked at Rachel. But you should apologize for how you treated someone you thought had nothing. Rachel lowered her eyes. Daniel continued quietly. That's the point of tonight. He walked toward the old man sitting at his table. I wanted to see how people treat someone when they believe that person has nothing to offer them. The old man smiled. You learned something. Daniel nodded. I did. Then the manager approached. Sir, should we remove them? Daniel shook his head. No. Rachel looked surprised. You're not going to throw us out. Daniel smiled. No. Why? Because I don't want revenge. He looked at her. I want you to remember this night. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. She had expected anger. She had expected humiliation. But Daniel wasn't trying to destroy her. That somehow hurt more. She quietly sat down. Her friends followed. The old man finished his meal. Before leaving, he approached Daniel. Son. Daniel turned. Yes. The old man placed a small folded piece of paper in his hand. Keep this. Daniel looked confused. What is it? Something my wife gave me many years ago. Daniel smiled. I can't take it. The old man shook his head. You gave me a meal when nobody else would. Now let me give you something. Daniel finally accepted it. The old man left. Daniel unfolded the paper. There was only one sentence written on it. The person who has nothing to gain from kindness is often the one who teaches us its greatest value. Daniel stared at the words. Then he looked toward the door. The old man was already gone. Rachel had watched everything. She stood and slowly approached Daniel. Can I talk to you? Daniel nodded. She looked embarrassed. I'm sorry. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Rachel continued. I judged you because of your clothes. I thought you were beneath us. I was wrong. Daniel looked at her. Why are you telling me this now? She swallowed. Because I know who you are. Daniel shook his head. That's exactly the problem. Rachel looked confused. Daniel continued. I don't want people to respect me because I'm a billionaire. I want them to respect me because I'm a human being. Rachel looked down. I understand. But Daniel noticed something. There were tears in her eyes. And for the first time that night, he wondered if Rachel's behavior had come from cruelty. Or from something much deeper. Then Rachel quietly said, my mother used to tell me the same thing. Daniel looked at her. What happened to your mother? Rachel wiped her eyes. She died 2 years ago. Daniel's expression softened. I'm sorry. Rachel nodded. After she died, I became obsessed with money. Because she spent her whole life struggling. I promised myself I'd never be poor. Daniel understood. Maybe Rachel wasn't heartless. Maybe she was simply afraid. He looked at her for several seconds. Then said, fear can make good people behave badly. Rachel looked up. Do you think I'm a good person? Daniel smiled slightly. I think you still have a chance to become one. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. She smiled for the first time. But neither of them noticed. A man standing outside the restaurant window. He had been watching Daniel the entire night. And when Daniel turned away, the man took out his phone. He made one call. He's here. A pause. Then he whispered. The billionaire is finally alone. He ended the call. Inside the restaurant, Daniel suddenly felt something was wrong. He looked toward the window. But the man was already gone. And Daniel had no idea that tonight's little experiment had attracted the attention of someone who wanted much more than his money. The restaurant was almost empty now. Most of the customers had already left. But Daniel couldn't stop thinking about the man he had seen outside the window. Something about him felt familiar. He walked toward the glass doors and looked into the dark street. Nothing. Just rain falling beneath the streetlights. Rachel came closer. Are you okay? Daniel turned. Yes. But Rachel knew he was lying. You look worried. Daniel looked at her. Someone was watching me. Rachel's expression changed. Who? I don't know. She looked through the window. Maybe you imagined it. Maybe. Daniel returned to his table. But something inside him told him not to ignore it. He called his security manager. Mark, I need you to check the cameras. Which cameras? Outside the restaurant. Especially the front entrance. Right away, sir. Daniel ended the call. Rachel watched him. You really think someone was following you? Daniel nodded. I don't know yet. She hesitated. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why were you dressed like that tonight? Daniel smiled. To find out who people really are. Rachel lowered her eyes. And did you? Daniel looked at her. Some people surprised me. Rachel smiled slightly. I suppose I'm one of them. Daniel nodded. You are. She laughed softly. That's fair. For the first time that night, they both laughed. Then Daniel's phone rang. It was Mark. Daniel answered. Did you find anything? Yes, sir. Daniel's expression changed. What? There was a man outside the restaurant. Can you identify him? Not yet. Where did he go? Mark paused. That's the strange part. What? He wasn't watching you. Daniel frowned. Then who? Mark's voice became serious. He was watching Rachel. Daniel looked at Rachel. She immediately noticed his expression. What happened? Daniel ended the call. Rachel. Yes. Do you know someone named Thomas? Rachel's face suddenly went pale. Daniel noticed. Rachel. She slowly shook her head. No. Are you sure? She looked toward the door. Then whispered. How do you know that name? Daniel stared at her. Because someone outside was watching you. Rachel's hands began trembling. Thomas found me. Who is Thomas? Rachel sat down. Her eyes filled with tears. He was my mother's lawyer. Daniel frowned. Why would he be watching you? Rachel took a deep breath. Because my mother left something behind. What? Money. Daniel waited. A lot of money. How much? Rachel looked at him. $20 million. Daniel was stunned. 20 million. Rachel nodded. But I never received it. Why? Because the money was placed in a trust. Daniel slowly understood. And Thomas controls the trust. Rachel nodded. My mother didn't trust him. She told me before she died that if anything happened to her, never sign anything Thomas gives me. Daniel's expression became serious. Has he contacted you? Several times. And what does he want? Rachel looked at him. The trust. Daniel stared at her. And what does he need from you? Rachel whispered. My signature. Suddenly, The restaurant lights went out. Rachel screamed. Daniel immediately stood. Stay close to me. The emergency lights came on. The restaurant was dark except for a few dim red lights. Then they heard something crash in the kitchen. Daniel grabbed his phone. Security. No answer. He tried again. Nothing. Rachel held his arm. Daniel, I'm here. Another crash. This time closer. Daniel moved toward the kitchen. Rachel followed. They reached the doorway. Nobody was there, but a window was broken. Rain was blowing inside. On the floor was a small black envelope. Daniel picked it up. There was no name. He opened it. Inside was a photograph. Rachel's mother. And beside her was Thomas. Daniel turned the photograph over. There was a message written in black ink. You should have stayed away from her. Daniel looked at Rachel. Her face was white. Who sent this? She shook her head. I don't know. Then Daniel noticed something else. Underneath. Midnight. Old warehouse. Come alone. Rachel stared at it. That's where my mother used to keep her documents. Daniel looked at her. You're not going. Rachel shook her head. I have to. No. My mother's entire truth could be there. It could be a trap. I know. Daniel looked at her. Then why go? Rachel's voice broke. Because I've spent 2 years being afraid. She wiped her tears. I'm tired of running. Daniel remained silent. Then he said, You're not going alone. Rachel looked at him. But you don't even know me. Daniel smiled. Maybe not. But I know one thing. What? He looked at the message. Nobody should have to face fear alone. Rachel smiled through her tears. But neither of them knew that the person waiting at the warehouse wasn't interested in Rachel's money anymore. He wanted something much more valuable. Daniel's life. The clock was almost midnight. Rain continued to fall as Daniel and Rachel drove toward the old warehouse. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Rachel kept staring through the window. Daniel. Yes. If something happens to me tonight. Daniel interrupted her. Nothing is going to happen to you. But you don't know that. I know enough. She looked at him. Why are you helping me? Daniel smiled faintly. Because someone once helped me when I needed it. Rachel looked down. You really believe kindness comes back? I believe we should do it anyway. The warehouse appeared ahead. It was an enormous abandoned building near the river. Most of the windows were broken. The old sign above the entrance was barely visible. Daniel stopped the car. Stay here. Rachel shook her head. No, Rachel. I'm coming. Daniel looked at her for a moment. Then nodded. They walked inside. The warehouse was completely dark. Daniel switched on his flashlight. Hello. His voice echoed through the empty building. No answer. Rachel held his arm. Then suddenly, a light came on. A single table stood in the middle of the warehouse. On it was a large brown envelope. Rachel slowly walked toward it. Daniel followed. She opened the envelope. Her hands began shaking. Inside were bank documents, property papers, photographs, and a handwritten letter from her mother. Rachel immediately recognized the handwriting. She unfolded it. Her eyes filled with tears. My dear Rachel, she began reading aloud. If you are reading this, then I am no longer able to protect you. Rachel stopped. Daniel gently said, Continue. She wiped her tears. My greatest fear was never losing my money. It was losing you. Rachel's lips trembled. Her mother continued. Thomas will tell you that he controls everything. That is a lie. The money was never supposed to belong to him. Rachel looked at Daniel. What does that mean? She continued reading. I placed the entire fortune into a private trust. But I appointed someone else to protect it. Rachel's eyes widened. Who? She looked at the next line. Then froze. Daniel noticed. Rachel. She whispered. Daniel Anderson. Daniel stared at her. What? Rachel showed him the letter. My mother named you. Daniel couldn't speak. Rachel continued reading. I chose Daniel because he is one of the few men I have met who never needed money to prove his worth. Daniel stepped backward. He remembered meeting Rachel's mother years earlier. But he hadn't realized who she was. The letter continued. Thomas believes the money belongs to him. He will try to force Rachel to sign the documents. Don't let him. Rachel suddenly heard footsteps. She looked toward the darkness. Daniel. I heard it. The footsteps came closer. Then a man's voice echoed through the warehouse. You should have listened to the warning. Thomas stepped out of the shadows. Rachel's face turned pale. Thomas. He smiled. Hello, Rachel. Daniel stepped in front of her. What do you want? Thomas laughed. You know exactly what I want. The trust. Yes. Daniel shook his head. You won't get it. Thomas's smile disappeared. You don't understand. He pointed toward Rachel. She is the only person who can release the money. Rachel held the letter tightly. No. Thomas stepped closer. You will sign. Never. Thomas looked at Daniel. Then perhaps your billionaire pride will change your mind. Daniel remained calm. You're threatening me. No. Thomas smiled. I'm giving you a choice. He pulled out his phone. A video appeared on the screen. Rachel looked at it. Her face suddenly changed. It showed a man sitting in a chair. His face was bruised. His hands were tied. Rachel covered her mouth. Dad. Daniel stared at the screen. Rachel's father was alive. Thomas whispered. Sign the trust documents, or he dies. Rachel began crying. Daniel looked at Thomas. You kidnapped her father. Thomas smiled. He made a mistake. What mistake? He trusted the wrong people. Daniel's eyes hardened. You've made your last mistake. Thomas laughed. You think money can save you? Daniel shook his head. No. He looked at Rachel. People can. Suddenly the warehouse doors opened. Several police officers rushed inside. Thomas's smile disappeared. Daniel had secretly called the police before entering. Drop the phone. Thomas tried to run. Two officers grabbed him. Rachel fell to her knees. Her father was still alive. The police immediately began searching for him. But before Thomas was taken away, he looked at Daniel. You think you've won? Daniel stared at him. Thomas smiled. You haven't even discovered the biggest secret. Daniel frowned. What secret? Thomas looked at Rachel, then said, ask her mother why she chose you. Thomas was taken away. Rachel looked at Daniel. Why would my mother choose you? Daniel shook his head. I don't know. Then Rachel noticed something inside the envelope. A small photograph. She picked it up. It showed Daniel as a young man, standing beside Rachel's mother. Rachel stared at him. You knew my mother. Daniel looked at the photograph. His face went pale. And suddenly, he remembered something he had forgotten for years. A promise. A hospital room. A dying woman. And a little girl standing outside the door. Rachel. Daniel whispered. Your mother didn't just ask me to protect your money. He looked at Rachel. She asked me to protect you. Rachel stared at Daniel. She asked you to protect me. Daniel couldn't answer. The old photograph was still in his hand. He looked at the young version of himself standing beside Rachel's mother. Then suddenly, the memory returned. A hospital room. A woman lying weakly in a bed. A little girl sitting quietly outside the room. And a promise Daniel had made many years ago. Daniel. The woman's voice had been weak. He had been standing beside her bed. I need you to do something for me. Daniel had been much younger then. What? She had reached for his hand. My daughter. Daniel had looked through the glass window. A little girl was sitting alone in the hallway. Rachel. She's everything I have. Daniel had nodded. I'll help her. The woman shook her head. Not just financially. She looked directly into his eyes. Protect her from people who only see her. Inheritance. Daniel had promised. I will. The woman smiled. One day, she may hate you. Daniel had laughed softly. Why would she hate me? Because she won't understand why you're helping her. The woman's eyes filled with tears. Just remember, if I'm not here, don't let money decide who she becomes. Daniel slowly returned to the present. Rachel was still standing in front of him. Why didn't you tell me? Daniel looked at her. Because I forgot. You forgot my mother. No. He shook his head. I forgot the promise. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Why did she trust you? Daniel smiled sadly. Because I wasn't a billionaire then. Rachel looked at him. You knew her before you became rich. Yes. How? Daniel took a breath. Your mother helped me when I was struggling. Rachel was shocked. You? Yes. I had nothing. She gave me a chance. She believed in me before anyone knew my name. Rachel looked down. So when you became successful, you remembered her. Daniel nodded. She was one of the first people I ever wanted to thank. Rachel began crying. And you protected my inheritance all these years. From a distance. Why? Because your mother asked me not to interfere unless you were truly in danger. Rachel wiped her tears. And tonight? Daniel smiled. Tonight you were in danger. Rachel looked at him. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then she quietly said, I'm sorry. Daniel frowned. For what? For judging you. She looked at his old clothes. For laughing at you. For thinking you were beneath me. Daniel smiled. You don't owe me anything. But I do. Rachel stepped closer. You taught me something tonight. What? She smiled through her tears. That a person's value isn't written on their clothes. Daniel laughed softly. Your mother would have been proud of you. Rachel looked toward the warehouse doors. What happens now? Daniel looked at her. Now you decide what kind of person you want to become. Rachel nodded. I think I know. 3 months later. The restaurant looked different. Not because Daniel had renovated it. But because something had changed inside it. A small table had been placed near the entrance. Every evening, anyone who couldn't afford a meal could sit there and receive one. No questions. No judgment. No embarrassment. Rachel had created the program herself. She called it, One Meal, One Chance. Daniel watched her from across the restaurant. She was talking to an elderly woman. Helping her choose a meal. The same woman who once might have been ignored. Was now being treated with dignity. Rachel looked over. She smiled at Daniel. He smiled back. Then she walked toward him. You know. What? I used to think being rich meant having everything. Daniel laughed. And now? Rachel looked around the restaurant. Now I think being rich means having something to give. Daniel nodded. Your mother would agree. Rachel smiled. Then she handed him a small envelope. What's this? Something I found in my mother's belongings. Daniel opened it. Inside was a short handwritten note. He read it. And his eyes filled with tears. Daniel, if Rachel ever learns to value people more than money, then you have kept your promise. Daniel slowly folded the note. Rachel looked at him. What does it say? Daniel smiled. Your mother says she's proud of you. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. She hugged him. And for the first time, Daniel realized something. He had started his experiment wanting to discover whether people could love someone who had nothing. But he had discovered something far more important. True wealth isn't about what you own. It's about what you give when nobody is watching. That night, the same restaurant where Daniel had once been mocked as a homeless man became a place where hundreds of people were treated with kindness. And Rachel, she never again judged anyone by their clothes. Because she had learned the lesson the hardest way possible. The person you look down on today may be the person who changes your life tomorrow.